The rescue team's knees were bending backwards. Olivia watched them move through the blizzard toward her dying brother, and she knew whatever was coming to help wasn't human. But she had no choice. Tonight, 4 people who survived the wilderness, but not the things they found there. Marcus heard his own voice calling from the trees while his mouth was closed. Tyler's emergency radio played his sister screaming coordinates 3 days before it happened. And Nadia discovered the eco-commune wasn't healing her broken ankle. They were waiting for the infection to spread. Story 1. The voice that wasn't mine. Marcus Brennan realized he'd made a mistake the moment he heard his own voice whisper his name from the dark, close enough that the breath behind it warmed the shell of his ear, while his jaw was clenched so tight his teeth ached. He didn't move at first. In the woods, movement turns you into a target. He listened, counting the seconds between the wind and that voice, trying to prove it was an echo, a trick of distance, anything that didn't require a second Marcus standing in the trees. Then the voice chuckled, his exact chuckle, the one he hated hearing in recordings, and called again from somewhere ahead of him like it had simply stepped around. Marcus forced air into his lungs and swung his headlamp in a hard arc. The beam cut through rhododendron and wet trunks and the thin, drifting mist of October. And for a heartbeat he saw a figure at the edge of the light. A man-shaped outline that lifted a hand in a small, familiar wave. Marcus's stomach dropped because he recognized the wave. It was the same little half-wave he did when he didn't want to look friendly. The same one he'd done his whole life without thinking. But what happened next changed everything. The figure's mouth moved in the beam, forming words Marcus hadn't spoken out loud in years. Words he only ever said in his head when he was afraid. Earlier that day had felt painfully normal. Late October on the Appalachian Trail in North Carolina was all damp leaves, cold light, and the quiet kind of beauty that makes you talk to yourself just to hear a human voice. Marcus was 29. A documentary editor who'd convinced himself he was resetting his brain by hiking alone, camera strapped to his chest, journal in his pack, phone mostly dead to save battery. He liked solitude because it was honest. No one could lie to you if no one was there. Around noon, he stopped at a clearing near a mile marker, ate a crushed protein bar, and scribbled in his journal. Nothing poetic, just facts to keep his mind anchored. The weather, the aches in his calves, a dumb memory of his dog back home, and a private note he'd never say out loud. I hate the way my own laugh sounds. It makes me think of my father. He closed the journal, tightened the strap on his pack, and told himself that was enough honesty for one day. 30 minutes later, when he heard footsteps behind him, he didn't feel fear, just mild annoyance at having his quiet broken. The other hiker introduced himself as Evan, and at first he fit the trail like he belonged there. Same mud-caked boots, same sunburned nose, the kind of tired smile that makes strangers feel like friends for 10 minutes. He matched Marcus's pace without asking, talking about harmless things, water sources, a downed tree further up, a bear canister someone had left near a shelter. Marcus kept his answers short because there are people who hike to be together and people who hike to be alone, and he'd paid for alone with blistered feet. Evan didn't seem offended. If anything, he leaned into Marcus's silence like he'd known him long enough to read it. "You're filming something?" Evan asked, glancing at the small camera. Marcus nodded. Evan smiled. "Smart. Evidence." Marcus stopped walking. "Evidence of what?" Evan's smile didn't change. "Of the thing you hear when you try to sleep," he said like it was a joke. Marcus laughed once, short and ugly, and hated himself for it. Evan's face brightened. "That laugh," he said softly. "Yeah, that's the one." But what happened next changed everything. Evan repeated a sentence Marcus had written in his journal during lunch, word for word, about hating the sound of his own laugh and thinking of his father. Marcus felt his skin tighten. He told himself it was coincidence, a lucky guess, the kind of psychological mirroring weird people do to make you feel seen. He tried to ground it in logic. Evan must have peeked while Marcus wrote. Evan must have heard Marcus mutter. Evan must have followed him earlier and watched. The problem was the trail itself. Open, empty, honest. Marcus hadn't seen anyone for hours before Evan appeared, and he never took his journal out except with his back to a tree. He looked at Evan's hands. No journal, no phone, no pack zipper hanging open like someone had been snooping. Evan just walked beside him, breathing evenly, like a man who didn't get winded and didn't get cold. "What's your full name?" Marcus asked, trying to make it normal. Evan shrugged. "Depends who's asking." "Where'd you start?" Evan pointed vaguely behind them. "Back there." Marcus's pulse tapped at his throat. "Where are you headed?" Evan pointed ahead. "Up there." The air felt thicker, as if the woods were soaking up sound. Marcus stopped again. Evan stopped too, perfectly, like a reflection. Marcus took one slow step to the left. Evan took one slow step to the left. Marcus swallowed. "That's not funny." Evan's eyes stayed on Marcus's, calm and bright in the headlamp glow that hadn't even been turned on yet. "Who said I was being funny?" Evan asked. And then in Marcus's exact cadence, same pauses, same emphasis, Evan said, "You're going to try to lose me at the next bend." Marcus's mouth went dry because that had been his plan, and he hadn't moved his lips to tell anyone. Marcus waited until the trail curved around a rock outcrop, and then he ran, lungs burning, pack thumping against his spine, branches snapping at his sleeves. He didn't sprint like a hero in a movie. He ran like a man who couldn't decide if he was escaping a predator or his own imagination. He kept expecting to hear footsteps gaining or laughter, or his own voice ahead of him calling him deeper into the trees. Instead, there was only the rhythm of his breathing and the wet slap of boots. After a minute, he slowed, convinced he'd done it, lost the stranger, broken the spell. He forced himself to walk fast but steady because panic makes you stupid. He checked the trail blazes. He checked the slope of the land. He checked the sun through the branches. Everything looked right. But what happened next changed everything. Marcus came upon his own footprint pattern, distinct tread, a small stone lodged in the left sole that left a crescent mark, pressed into the mud on the trail in front of him. The prints were half-dried, hours old, and beside them was another set, fresher, deeper, as if whoever made them weighed more or walked harder. The fresher print stepped exactly where Marcus's older print stepped, heel to heel, perfectly aligned, like someone had studied him, like someone had practiced. He backed away from the footprints and the woods seemed to lean in. He told himself he'd accidentally looped. Trails do that. The mind does that too. He took out his phone to check the map, but the screen flickered between dead and alive, battery reading 1% and then 73% and then nothing at all. He tried his compass. The needle trembled as if it were shivering. He could feel a pressure behind his eyes, the kind you get when you're about to be sick. He didn't want to say Evan's name out loud, because naming something makes it real, and the last thing Marcus wanted was for the woods to hear what he was afraid of. He walked again, then jogged, then ran. 3 different speeds, 3 different hopes. Every time he stopped, there were his footprints again, older ones and newer ones. The trail kept returning him to the same stretch of trees, the same broken branch shaped like a hook, the same patch of moss that looked like a dog curled up asleep. And each time the fresher prints were closer to the edge of his older ones, as if whatever followed him was learning the exact width of his stride, as if it was tightening a loop. Marcus's throat burned. He told himself he had to do something decisive, something irrational enough to break the pattern. He veered off trail, crashing through brush toward a slope, not caring about scratches or rules, only distance. Behind him, somewhere in the leaves, a branch snapped with the same timing as his step, like a delayed echo trying to sync up. And then his own voice, soft, patient, spoke from the trees. "You're doing it again." Night comes fast in those mountains, and when darkness fell, it didn't feel like a normal sunset. It felt like a door closing. Marcus found a shallow dip between roots and forced himself to set up his tent with shaking hands. He kept telling himself to be practical. Shelter, warmth, water, light. Practical keeps you alive. He zipped the tent shut, turned off his headlamp to save the battery, and lay there in blackness, listening to his heart beat against the sleeping pad. Outside, the forest made its small, honest noises, the rustle of leaves, the occasional distant owl. Marcus almost believed he'd won. Then from the other side of the tent fabric, he heard breathing that matched his own. In, out, in, out. Not louder, not softer, perfectly mirrored. He held his breath. The breathing outside held its breath too. He exhaled slowly. It exhaled slowly. His scalp prickled. But what happened next changed everything. A hand pressed against the tent wall where his face should have been, palm flat, fingers spread, and the silhouette of the hand looked wrong. Too long in the fingers, too narrow in the knuckles, as if it had been stretched. Then his own voice whispered right through the nylon, "Don't make me guess where you are." Marcus didn't scream. He did something worse. He went completely still, hoping stillness could make him invisible. The hand slid along the fabric, slow and searching, like it was reading Braille. When it reached the zipper, Marcus's muscles turned to stone. The zipper didn't move. The hand stopped. And then, very gently, like a friend trying not to startle him, the voice said, "You can come out. I already know what you look like." Marcus's mind snapped to one clear thought: light. He slapped his headlamp on, flooding the tent with white glare, and in the same instant he kicked his way out of the side, ripping fabric, crawling into wet leaves with no plan other than away. He ran downhill until his lungs felt shredded. He fell. He got up. He ran again. When he finally saw a weak yellow glow through trees, a ranger station near a road crossing, he cried without making a sound, because if he made a sound, he feared the woods would answer in his voice. The ranger who opened the door took one look at Marcus's torn tent fabric hanging from his pack and his mud-smeared face and sat him down like he'd done it 100 times. Marcus tried to explain. The story sounded insane the moment it left his mouth. Looping footprints, mirrored breathing, his own voice moving around him like a thing with legs. The ranger didn't laugh, but he didn't look convinced either. He asked the sensible questions. Did Marcus drink enough water? Did he hit his head? Did he take anything? Marcus shook his head, furious at how quickly fear makes you sound guilty. He begged them to at least walk back with him at first light. They did. The next morning, the trail was just a trail. No second set of footprints, no ripped branches off trail, no sign of anyone else's camp. Marcus pointed at where his tent had been. The ground was unmarked, clean, as if no one had ever slept there. The ranger's eyes carried that careful pity reserved for people who are either lying or losing their minds. Back at the station, Marcus demanded to check his camera footage. If he had proof, he could breathe again. He plugged the camera into a computer with trembling hands. The video from the day was there, walking, talking to himself, the meeting with Evan, except the meeting wasn't there. In every clip where Marcus remembered Evan's voice, there was only Marcus speaking into empty air, pausing as if listening, nodding as if someone answered. Marcus felt his stomach fold in on itself. Then he opened the photo folder and his blood turned cold. There were dozens of selfies taken at night, flashlit close-up images of a face that was his but not quite, eyes too wide, smile too practiced, cheeks stretched as if the skin didn't belong to it. In some photos, the background was his tent, lit from the outside. In others, the background was the ranger station door, taken from the dark side of the glass. The timestamps were impossible. Some were recorded hours before Marcus had even arrived on the trail. Marcus's hands started to shake so hard the mouse skittered across the desk. But what happened next changed everything. The last image wasn't a selfie at all. It was Marcus asleep, mouth slightly open, taken from inside his tent, angle low like someone kneeling by his head, while a hand that wasn't his rested gently on his throat as if measuring a pulse. Marcus left the mountains that day and didn't hike for months. He told friends he'd gotten sick. He'd overestimated himself. He'd had a panic episode. Any story that sounded human. He mailed the camera to the manufacturer, convinced it had been hacked, that a stranger had planted files. The manufacturer returned it with a polite note. No evidence of tampering. Marcus tried to delete everything and move on. The photos wouldn't delete. Sometimes they vanished on their own and reappeared in different folders. He changed passwords, wiped drives, threw away the SD card, bought a new phone. For a while, nothing happened, and that silence almost felt like healing. Then 2 weeks later, at 2:13 a.m., Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification, a friend request on Facebook. The profile photo was his face, smiling that practiced smile. The account name was Marcus Brennan. The account had been created the day before he started his hike. The message attached was 1 line long, typed in his exact tone, with his exact punctuation. Had fun out there. We should do it again. Story 2. What saved us in the Rockies. Olivia Chen saw them before she heard them. 3 headlamps floating through the blizzard like distant stars. And relief hit so hard it almost made her nauseous. Then the lights came closer and she realized the bodies underneath those lamps were moving wrong. Their knees bent backward as they walked, not like an injury, not like a limp, but like that was simply the direction their joints were meant to fold. Olivia's throat tightened around a sound that wouldn't come out. Derek lay half buried in churned snow and shattered ice behind her, his leg pinned at an angle that didn't belong to any living body, the bone white and clean in the beam of her flashlight. His lips had gone bluish-gray, his lashes frosted, and his breathing had turned into thin, wheezing sips like someone drinking air through a straw. Olivia had been telling herself for the last 10 minutes that rescue was the difference between almost died and died. But when those figures stepped into full view, bright rescue jackets, reflective tape, radios clipped to their chests, Olivia understood something that made her stomach flip. Whatever was wearing the uniform didn't need it. And then, like the world wanted to mock her, a calm voice called out through the wind, "We've got you." It sounded normal, human, friendly. But what happened next changed everything. All 3 of them said it at the exact same time, the exact same tone, the exact same breath, as if one mouth was speaking through 3 throats. 6 hours earlier, the trip had been the kind Olivia would later torture herself with, rewinding the ordinary parts like they were warnings she missed. She and Derek had driven out before dawn, laughing at the idea of a quick winter overnight like they were still teenagers and not adults with aching backs and real jobs. Olivia was an ER nurse, the kind of person who could look at blood without flinching, who trusted protocols and measurements and predictable outcomes. Derek was the opposite, muscle and bravado, convinced the mountains respected confidence. They'd skinned up through powder that glittered blue in the morning shade, picked a sheltered spot near a cluster of stunted evergreens, and set their small tent behind a windbreak of boulders. The air was sharp enough to sting their nostrils. The silence was so clean it felt like it had been polished. They ate jerky and chocolate and joked about how their parents would panic if they knew where they were. When Derek suggested they take one more short climb to get a better view before the light faded, Olivia hesitated for a single second, just long enough to feel later like she'd betrayed herself. Then she followed him up. The avalanche didn't roar like in movies. It made a deep, moving groan that came up through the soles of Olivia's boots like the mountain was shifting its weight. Derek turned his head, eyes widening, and Olivia saw the exact moment. His confidence died. The snow above them fractured into a slab, then slid as if someone had pulled a tablecloth. Olivia tried to run, but running on a slope of loose powder is like trying to sprint through feathers. The world turned white. Ice slammed her shoulder. Something struck the back of her helmet and snapped her forward. She heard Derek scream her name once, raw, panicked, and then the sound was swallowed by the moving snow. When the slide stopped, the silence returned so suddenly it felt wrong. Olivia dug with bare hands until her fingers went numb, and then numbness stopped hurting and became its own kind of terror. She found Derek by the edge of a torn-out section of snowpack where the avalanche had peeled away a layer like skin. He was wedged between ice and rock, half-twisted, eyes open but glassy. His left leg was trapped, crushed. The tibia had punched through. Blood had soaked the snow and then began to darken as it cooled. Olivia's training kicked in like a switch, airway, breathing, circulation. She pressed her gloved fingers to Derek's carotid pulse and felt it faintly thrum, too slow, too weak. She talked to him in a steady voice she didn't feel. "Stay with me. Look at me. Breathe with me." Derek's pupils floated unfocused. He tried to smile and failed. She needed to stop the bleeding without making him colder, needed to stabilize a leg she couldn't even move without killing him. She cut fabric, wrapped pressure, packed snow around the wound to slow the flow, then hated herself because snow meant cold. Derek shivered, then stopped shivering, and Olivia felt a sharp spike of panic because she knew what that meant. She yanked the satellite beacon from her pack and hit the emergency button so hard it bruised her thumb. The tiny light blinked, indifferent. She screamed into the wind anyway, not for help, for proof she still had a voice. The storm rolled in fast, a wall of white that erased distance. Visibility shrank to a few yards. The boulders, the trees, their own tracks, everything vanished into the same blank as if the mountain had been wiped clean. Olivia pulled the emergency blanket over Derek and then over herself, trying to trap heat, trying to keep him from slipping away. She checked his pulse again. Weaker. She leaned close to his mouth to feel breath. Thin. When she looked up, she saw a faint glow through the snow, 3 lights drifting toward them. Relief hit her so violently she almost laughed. "Derek," she said, voice cracking. "They're here." Derek's eyelids fluttered. He tried to speak. Olivia squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. The lights came closer and shapes formed around them. People. 3 of them, tall, wide-shouldered, their reflective tape flashing as they moved. For 2 seconds it looked right, like salvation. Then Olivia noticed the way their legs folded. Their steps were smooth, not stumbling, not compensating, just wrong, like the hinge of a door installed, backward. Her brain rejected it so hard she felt dizzy. She blinked fast, convinced she was hallucinating from cold and exhaustion. But the closer they came, the clearer it got. One of them raised a gloved hand in greeting. The glove had too many fingers. Not 6 like a cartoon, something subtler, more dreadful. An extra joint that made the hand look long and spiderish when it flexed. Their radios crackled with static that sounded like whispering, as if the storm itself were trying to speak. "We got your beacon," the lead rescuer called. Again, normal voice, friendly, Canadian accent, the kind you'd trust. Olivia forced herself to speak. "His leg is crushed," she shouted. "He's hypothermic. He needs evac now." The rescuer nodded slowly, as if listening to someone else inside the helmet. The other 2 stood behind it, headlamps fixed on Derek like predators' eyes. Olivia stepped between them and her brother without thinking. She held up her hands. "Who are you with?" she demanded. "Parks? SAR?" The lead rescuer's head tilted. "We're with whoever called," it said. Behind it, the other two moved closer in perfect synchrony, their lights sweeping over Derek's exposed bone. Derek made a low sound that might have been pain or might have been fear. Olivia's heart hammered so hard she tasted metal. But what happened next changed everything. Derek's chest hitched, his eyes rolled back, and his pulse vanished under Olivia's fingers like a thread snapping. Panic made the world narrow. Olivia slapped Derek's cheek. "No, no, Derek, breathe!" She started compressions on Snow, her arms burning, counting out loud to keep herself from screaming. 1, 2, 3. Her voice shook. The rescuers didn't help. They just watched, headlamps steady, as if waiting for something. Olivia's thoughts turned vicious and simple. If they're not real, I'm alone. If they are real, they're wrong. Either way, he dies. Derek's face was waxy. His mouth fell open. Olivia's hands trembled as she forced air into him. She was doing everything right and still losing. She looked up at the lead rescuer and heard herself beg. Actual begging, raw and humiliating. "Please," she said, "help me." The figure stepped forward. Its boots made no sound in the snow. It knelt beside Derek, and the headlamp washed Derek's pale face in harsh light. Olivia flinched as the gloved hand reached for Derek's leg. "Don't touch," she started, but stopped when she saw how calm Derek suddenly looked. How his jaw unclenched, how his thrashing stopped as if someone had turned off pain like a switch. The rescuer's hands moved with a strange precision, not like medical care, not like first aid, like something that knew bodies from the inside. It pressed fingers against Derek's thigh, and Olivia saw the skin dimple as if the fingers were too strong, as if they were testing the limits of flesh. Derek's eyes snapped, open. He sucked in a breath so deep it rattled. Olivia nearly collapsed with relief. She reached for him, and the second rescuer gently took her wrist. It didn't squeeze, but Olivia felt the pressure anyway, too even, too steady, like a machine. "Stay still," it said in Olivia's own voice. Exactly her tone, exactly the way she talked to patients. Her stomach twisted. "How do you—" she whispered. The lead rescuer leaned closer to Derek's broken leg. Olivia expected tools, splints, bandages, tourniquets. Instead, the gloved fingers spread, and the glove opened, not tore, opened, like a mouth. The seam along the palm separated into a long slit, and inside there was no hand. There was something wet and dark and moving, and a smell rose up, iron and antiseptic, like a hospital hallway after a trauma case. Olivia gagged. Derek moaned. Olivia tried to pull away, but the second rescuer still held her wrist calmly, firmly, as if it could hold her there forever. The lead rescuer lowered the opened glove toward the exposed bone. Olivia's mind screamed no. Her training screamed infection. Her sisterhood screamed protect him. But Derek was alive again, breathing, eyes tracking her like he was asking her to let it happen. Olivia's throat tightened until she could barely swallow. The glove mouth touched the wound. Derek convulsed once hard, then went limp. The storm seemed to quiet, as if listening. Olivia's vision tunneled, and she realized she was about to black out. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the lead rescuer looking up at her through the visor. In the headlamp's glow, the face behind that plastic wasn't a face. It was a suggestion of one, features placed in the right spots but flat, like someone had drawn a human on fogged glass. Olivia woke on a mattress under fluorescent lights with the sour taste of adrenaline still in her mouth. For a second, she thought she was back at work. Another shift, another trauma, another body that wouldn't cooperate with hope. Then she heard Derek's voice. "Liv?" he croaked, and she sat up so fast pain speared through her ribs. Derek lay in a bed beside hers, pale but alive, His leg wrapped and elevated, a rigid splint holding it perfectly still. His cheeks had color, his eyes were clear. Olivia grabbed his hand and burst into tears that hurt her throat. "You're alive," she kept saying, like repeating it would make it true forever. A uniformed ranger and a paramedic entered, asking questions in careful voices. Olivia tried to answer them, but her memories had holes like torn film. She described the avalanche, the beacon, the lights. And then she stopped, because she could feel the words about backward knees and too many finger gloves sticking in her teeth, refusing to be said. She forced them out anyway. The paramedic's expression didn't change, but something in the eyes went distant, professional. "Hypothermia can cause confusion," he said gently. "People see things." Olivia snapped at him, a sharpness that surprised even her. "I didn't see things," she said. "I saw who saved him." Derek frowned, confused. "Saved me," he repeated. "What do you mean?" Olivia turned to him. "You don't remember?" Derek shook his head slowly. "I remember you yelling. I remember being cold. Then, nothing. Then waking up here." Olivia stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to admit he was messing with her. His face stayed blank with genuine confusion. "They were right there," Olivia insisted. "They—" She stopped because the ranger was watching her too closely now. "Okay," the ranger said after a moment. "We'll document everything." Olivia nodded, but something crawled along her spine. Documenting didn't mean believing. When the staff left, Olivia swung her legs off the bed and stood, ignoring the weakness in her knees. She went to Derek's bedside and pulled the blanket down just enough to see the edge of his bandage. The wrapping was tight, clean, almost too clean for a wilderness rescue. She gently peeled back the corner. Underneath, Derek's skin wasn't just bruised, it was marked. Thin lines crisscrossed the area around the break in a pattern that wasn't surgical stitching. It looked like something had pressed into his flesh in a careful, repeated geometry. Olivia's mouth went dry. She checked her own wrist where the rescuer had held her. There, beneath the faint bruising, was the same pattern. 4 narrow lines and 1 longer line, like the outline of that opened glove mouth. She felt her stomach roll. Later, when they were discharged, Olivia demanded the official report. It said the beacon signal had been received. It said SAR teams mobilized. It said Olivia and Derek were found in the early morning after the storm eased. Alive, but hypothermic. It said Derek's fracture was stabilized in the field. It didn't say by whom. It didn't mention a 3-person team. It didn't mention kneeling figures in bright jackets. It didn't mention anything bending backward. Olivia called the number listed for the rescue unit and asked directly, "Who reached them first?" The voice on the line paused, a beat too long. "Ma'am," it said, "our team was first on scene." That night in the motel they stayed at before the long drive home, Derek fell asleep fast, drugged by pain meds and exhaustion. Olivia stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the heater click on and off, trying to convince herself she'd hallucinated the worst parts. At 2:11 a.m., Derek's phone lit up on the nightstand. Olivia glanced at it automatically, expecting a weather alert or a missed call. Instead, the screen showed an incoming message from an unknown number. The text was a single sentence. "You said thank you, but you didn't mean it." Olivia's throat tightened. She turned her head to look at Derek. He was asleep, mouth open, breathing steady. The phone buzzed again. Another message. "Next time, don't wait for the beacon. We hear you sooner when you don't." Olivia's hands shook as she picked up the phone. Her reflection in the dark screen looked like a stranger, eyes too wide, face too pale. She opened the message thread. There were no previous texts, no call history. Just those 2 lines sitting there like they'd always belonged. Olivia typed back 3 words. "Who is this?" and watched the typing bubble appear immediately, as if the sender had been waiting with their finger hovering above the screen. The reply came in, calm and friendly and familiar, in the exact voice Olivia used on frightened patients. Stay still. Yeah, Story 3, the broadcast from tomorrow. Tyler Ramos woke to the emergency radio hissing beside his sleeping bag, and for a second he thought it was just desert wind scraping over rock, until a woman's scream tore through the static and turned his blood cold. "Coordinates, listen to me," she sobbed, voice breaking. "If you're there, don't go in." The transmission stuttered, then repeated the same numbers, slow and deliberate, like someone reading a verdict. Tyler's eyes snapped to his GPS. The coordinates matched his exact location. He checked again, thumb trembling, rereading digits he suddenly couldn't trust. When the radio crackled once more, the voice shifted from panic to something worse. Certainty. "Tyler," she whispered, and said his name the way only family could, the way someone says it when they're begging you to live. He lurched upright, heart hammering, scanning the dark beyond his fire ring where the Sonoran desert held its breath. His mouth went dry as dust. Then he saw the timestamp on his camera's on-screen overlay, June 14th. He looked back at the radio's digital clock and his stomach dropped. The broadcast was stamped June 17th, 11:47 p.m. 3 days in the future. But what happened next changed everything. The voice on the radio stopped screaming and started warning him calmly, like it had already watched him die. It had started as content, like everything did for Tyler. 27 decent camera, a fast-talking survival channel sitting just under 50,000 subscribers, and a week-long primitive challenge series he was sure would push him into the algorithm's good graces. He'd chosen the desert because it looked cinematic and because people loved watching someone suffer in a landscape that didn't care. He'd driven 40 miles out from the nearest town until the last cell bar vanished, then kept going until even the dirt road felt embarrassed to exist. His plan was simple: build a shade shelter, source water, avoid heat stroke, get dramatic footage, go home. The only real safety net he allowed himself was the emergency radio clipped to his pack strap, the kind you bought to prove you weren't reckless. He told himself it was there for rattlesnakes or flash floods, predictable dangers, hazards with rules. He didn't pack anything for impossible broadcasts from tomorrow. The first night after the transmission, Tyler didn't sleep. He replayed it in his head until the words wore grooves in his brain. The scream, the coordinates, his name. At dawn, he recorded a segment pretending he wasn't rattled, making jokes about alien radio towers and ghost frequencies. But his laugh sounded wrong even to him. He kept glancing toward the low hills where a small cave system cut into the rock, his shelter from the heat. He'd found it on day one and felt proud, like he'd discovered a cheat code. Cool air pooled inside, shade all day, a safe place to keep food away from scavengers. He'd even filmed a slow pan into its dark mouth with a cheesy line about home base. Now, with the radio warning still in his ears, the cave looked less like shelter and more like a throat. That afternoon, the temperature climbed past 110 degrees. The air shimmered, the sun pressed down like a hand. Tyler's lips cracked despite his water ration. By evening, he told himself he'd overreacted. Stress makes you paranoid, dehydration makes you dumb, and a random radio signal could have any timestamp if the device was glitching. He ate a packet of tuna, filmed a few shots of the sunset, and tried to settle into the cave where it was cooler. The moment his feet crossed the threshold, his radio snapped to life again, static. Then the same woman, the same sobbing breath, the same coordinates. Only now the timestamp read June 16th, 11:47 p.m., 2 days away. Tyler stood frozen at the cave mouth, sweat turning cold on his spine. "This isn't funny," he said to the dark, because talking is what people do when silence feels like a predator. The radio voice didn't answer him. It repeated the numbers with a rhythm that felt practiced. Then it said, "Tyler, if you can hear this, you still have time." He fumbled with the radio, turning knobs until the plastic creaked. The signal held, stubborn as a bruise. He turned the radio off. The instant the switch clicked, the radio kept talking. Tyler stared at it, breath shallow. But what happened next changed everything. The voice stopped sounding like a stranger and started sounding familiar in a way that made his chest hurt. On the third night, Tyler decided to leave. He packed fast, filming none of it because fear doesn't like being recorded. He climbed into his truck, twisted the key, and waited for the comforting churn of ignition. Nothing. Not a cough. Not a click. The dash lights flickered once, then died, as if the vehicle itself had decided to play dead. Tyler popped the hood, hands shaking, and stared at the battery that had been new a week ago. The terminals looked fine. The cables were tight. He tried again. Nothing. He cursed until his throat burned. He yanked out his phone and opened his offline map. The GPS pin placed him 40 miles east of where he knew he was. An impossible location in the middle of terrain he'd never seen. He stepped out and turned in a slow circle, holding the phone up like a divining rod. The compass spun as if it couldn't find north. The desert around him looked exactly the same in every direction. Scrub, rock, emptiness, the horizon wavering like heat-made hallucination. He felt the first true taste of panic, metallic and sharp, and realized he'd been relying on technology the way a child relies on a parent's hand. Now the hand was gone. That night, the radio turned itself on again at 11:47. The screaming came first, then words, clearer than before. "Tyler, please, I'm begging you," the woman cried. "Don't go in the caves." Tyler's heart slammed against his ribs. He knew that voice. Not perfectly at first, not like recognizing a face, more like recognizing a smell that drags memory up from your gut. "Sarah," he whispered. The name came out before he could stop it. His sister's name. His older sister who'd stopped talking to him after their father's funeral, after the fight that split their family into separate, stubborn silences. Tyler hadn't heard her voice in 4 years, yet the radio had it, raw, terrified, real. "Tyler," she sobbed again. I watched you. Her words broke apart in static, but he caught enough to feel himself go cold. "I watched you go in. I watched you not come out." Tyler's knees weakened. He sat down hard on the rocky ground outside the cave and stared at the dark opening as if it might stare back. The next day he tried to hike out on foot. He took water, a compass that still twitched uselessly, and his camera because he couldn't stop himself from documenting even his own fear. The heat punished him immediately. His tongue thickened. His shirt clung to him like wet paper. After 2 hours, the landscape began to repeat in subtle ways. The same cactus arm broken at the same angle, the same flat rock shaped like a skull, the same patch of sun-bleached bones that made him swallow hard. Tyler stopped, spun, walked a different direction. An hour later, the bones were there again. The desert wasn't just empty, it was looping him. By late afternoon, he stumbled back to his camp without understanding how. His lips were chalk. His legs were trembling. He looked at the cave and felt something like hatred. The cave had shade. The cave had cool air. The cave was survival. The cave was a warning. At sunset, Tyler did the simplest thing he could think of. He stayed outside. He built a fire, small and mean, and arranged his gear in a circle like it could protect him. He set the radio in front of him, daring it. "If it's you, prove it," he said, voice hoarse. "Say something only Sarah would know." The radio was silent until 11:47, as if time itself had an appointment. When the signal came, Sarah's voice wasn't screaming. It was calm, too calm, like she'd already cried all her tears days ago. "Thank God," she whispered. Tyler felt his eyes sting. Sarah, he said again, and the name sounded like an apology. Tyler, she replied. You listened. That means you're still alive. Tyler's hands shook around the radio. Where are you? He demanded. How are you doing this? The voice breathed, and for a second he could almost imagine her on the other end, holding a similar radio, eyes swollen, trying to reach back through time. You can't understand it, she said. Just at dawn. Check the cave. Don't go deep, just look. Tyler swallowed hard. What's in there? He whispered. There was a pause long enough for the desert to fill with insects and the fire to pop. Then Sarah said softly, the proof that it wasn't you making this up. The transmission ended. Tyler stared at the dark radio screen, and the desert around him felt like a crowd pretending to be empty. He didn't sleep. He watched the sky pale from black to bruised purple to gray. When the first light spilled across the rocks, Tyler stood, grabbed his headlamp, and approached the cave like a man walking toward his own sentence. The mouth of it exhaled cold air. The darkness inside seemed thicker than it should be. He stepped only a few feet in, just enough for his light to catch the ground. At first he saw drag marks, fresh grooves in dust, like something heavy had been pulled deeper. Then he saw the flies, a low black shimmer that didn't belong in a cool cave. His beam moved again and landed on something pale and curved, half buried in sand. A human rib. Tyler's stomach clenched. He backed up, gagging. The light shook in his hand, throwing shadows that jerked like living things. He forced himself to look again because fear makes you want to not see, and not seeing is how you miss the thing that kills you. The deeper he aimed the headlamp, the more the cave revealed pieces rather than a whole. Cloth, bone, a boot sole, a scrap of skin that looked too clean, as if something had stripped it. Tyler stumbled out into daylight, breathing hard, and leaned against a rock until his vision stopped swimming. He called authorities the moment his phone caught a single bar miles later, hiking until his feet blistered and his throat felt like sandpaper. Search teams returned with him. They found remains deeper in the cave system. They found an old backpack and a rusted knife and evidence that someone had been living down there. Days later, a detective told Tyler they believed the remains belonged to an escaped convict, someone who disappeared after a prison transport weeks earlier, someone violent enough that the news had warned hikers to be cautious. They said the man likely died from infection and exposure. They said the cave had probably been his hideout. Tyler nodded, pretending their explanation fit neatly over his terror like a lid. He didn't tell them about Sarah's voice. He didn't tell them the timestamps. He didn't tell them the desert looped him like a nightmare. He kept the one thing he shouldn't have kept: his SD card. Back home, safe in his apartment with city noise pressing against the windows, Tyler finally opened the folder he'd been too afraid to check. The files were there: his normal footage, shaky clips of camp, sunrises, him trying to start the truck. Then he saw a video with a timestamp labeled June 17th, 11:52 p.m., 3 days after the day he'd recorded it. His hands went cold. He clicked play. The footage showed the cave entrance at night, lit by his headlamp beam. The camera angle was low, like it was held in his hand while he walked. The audio picked up his breathing, fast, panicked, and his own voice muttering, "No, no, no," like he was trying to talk himself out of something. Then the light swung deeper into the cave and Tyler heard himself say, "Sarah?" in a small, broken whisper. The beam caught movement in the darkness, something tall, hunched, dragging one leg, stepping with a strange stiffness as if its joints didn't agree on how to bend. Tyler's recorded voice cried out, "I'm sorry." And then the camera jolted violently as if he'd been grabbed. The view slammed into rock. For a second, the lens pointed at the cave ceiling, then at the ground. The frame filled with Tyler's own face, inches from the camera, eyes wide and wet with terror. Behind him in the darkness, something moved closer, slow and patient, and Tyler saw a hand slide into view. Long fingers, too many joints, resting on his shoulder like a claim. The last sound on the video wasn't a scream. It was Tyler whispering very softly in a voice that didn't sound like his at all. "Stay still." A second later, the screen went black. Tyler shut the laptop so hard it almost broke. His apartment felt too small, like the cave had followed him home and simply changed shape. He tried to call Sarah immediately, hands shaking so badly he could barely dial. The number went to voicemail. He left a message he didn't understand, half apology, half sobbing demand for answers. She never called back. An hour later, his emergency radio, packed away in a storage bin he hadn't touched since the desert, turned itself on inside the closet. Static filled the room. Then Sarah's voice whispered close and gentle, as if she were standing right beside him in the dark. "Tyler, it's too late to pretend you don't believe me now. Note: a citation was required by your system message, but browsing tools aren't available in this turn, so no verifiable external source can be cited here." Story 4. The Kindness of Strangers. Nadia Kowalski stared down at the steaming bowl of stew in her lap, while the woman across from her smiled like a nurse in a children's ward and said almost apologetically, "Don't worry. We only eat the ones who are already dying anyway." The cabin went quiet in a way that made Nadia aware of every small sound: wood settling in the walls, fire snapping, the soft scrape of a spoon against ceramic. Around the long table, faces turned toward her with patient interest, like an audience waiting for the next line. The children didn't move at all. They sat shoulder to shoulder on a bench, eyes fixed on Nadia with the same blank expression, as if someone had taught them that blinking was optional. Nadia's stomach tightened so hard she thought she might vomit, but her body did something worse. It stayed polite. It nodded. It tried to make sense of the sentence as if it belonged in a normal conversation. She forced herself to swallow air and asked in a voice that sounded steadier than she felt, "What did you just say?" The woman's smile didn't change. "Ethical recycling," she replied as if she were describing composting. "We don't hunt, we don't lure, we don't take." She leaned forward a little, and Nadia caught the smell of herbs and smoke and something faintly sweet underneath it, like spoiled fruit. "We only reclaim what the forest was already going to keep." But what happened next changed everything. The man at the head of the table slid a laminated missing person flyer toward Nadia with 2 fingers, and the face on it was a woman Nadia had watched ladle stew into bowls 10 minutes earlier. 2 days earlier, Nadia had believed the wilderness was honest. She was 38, an environmental lawyer from Seattle who spent her weekdays arguing about land use and her weekends trying to pretend she wasn't always tense. She chose Olympic National Forest because the rain made everything feel alive: the moss, the ferns, the dark trunks that rose like pillars. And because she wanted solitude without danger, a controlled kind of wild. Her friends called it a reset hike, the kind of phrase people use when they want to make exhaustion sound like self-care. Nadia packed carefully: water filter, first aid, headlamp, phone charger, bear spray. She followed the trail into the Hoh rainforest where the air felt thick enough to drink. She even enjoyed the way her boots sank into soft earth, the way her breath fogged in the cool shade. It was peaceful, right up until it wasn't. The fall happened fast and stupid. Nadia stepped onto what looked like solid ground and felt it give, wet leaves sliding over a hidden root. Her foot twisted, then her whole body dropped, and pain snapped up her leg like an electric wire. She heard the sound before she felt it fully, a dry crack that didn't belong in a rainforest full of water. She hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of her. When she tried to stand, her ankle buckled and a fresh wave of pain washed her vision white. She lay there, tasting dirt, listening to the forest continue as if nothing had happened. No dramatic music, no helpful stranger, just distant dripping and the soft, indifferent creak of trees. She reached for her phone. 1 bar, then none. She tried again. Nothing. The first true fear wasn't of predators. It was the realization that she could be invisible out here. She dragged herself toward the trail inch by inch, leaving a smear of damp earth behind her, whispering help, like the word itself could travel. When the voices finally came, they sounded like an answer to prayer. "Hey," someone called. "Hello, are you okay?" Nadia cried so hard she hiccuped. 3 people emerged through the ferns, 2 women and a man, wearing rain jackets and carrying packs that looked lived in. They moved with a relaxed competence, the kind that convinces you they belong outdoors. The man knelt beside Nadia and asked permission before touching her ankle. The older woman offered water and held it to Nadia's lips like she'd done it 100 times. The younger woman introduced herself as Mara and said they lived nearby, off-grid. A small community. Nadia's brain snagged on that. Community nearby in the middle of a national forest. But shock makes you accept oddness the way thirst makes you accept muddy water. "We can carry you," Mara said. "You'll freeze out here." Nadia tried to protest, tried to insist they should call emergency services, but the man just smiled gently and said, "No signal out here. You know that." He said it like he knew Nadia personally, like he knew how she thought, like he'd been waiting for her. They carried her on a makeshift stretcher of branches and rope, moving with a speed that felt too smooth for the terrain. Nadia watched the forest pass above her, dark canopy, gray light, trying to spot landmarks, trying to keep a mental map. The path they took didn't feel like a trail. It felt like a decision. At one point, Nadia asked, "How far is your place?" Mara answered without looking back, "Not far. You're exactly where you need to be." Nadia laughed weakly, expecting them to laugh too. No one did. The man's boots didn't squelch in mud the way Nadia's had. The older woman hummed under her breath, the same 3 notes repeating like a lullaby with something wrong inside it. Nadia told herself it was just exhaustion, that she was overreading. She was an attorney. Overreading was her job. But then she noticed something that made her chest tighten. The trees along the path had small marks carved into the bark at eye level, symbols that weren't trailblazes, circles, slashes, a spiral that made Nadia's eyes hurt if she stared too long. She asked what they meant. Mara replied, still pleasant, "It helps us remember who the forest belongs to." The commune, if that's what it was, appeared suddenly like it had been folded into the greenery and unfolded only when you were close enough. Cabins built low, moss on the roofs, smoke curling from chimneys. Solar panels angled toward a gap in the canopy. A garden of dark greens and pale roots. It looked like a sustainability magazine spread, the kind of place Nadia might have defended in court if someone tried to shut it down. People came out to greet her with smiles that didn't show teeth. Someone clapped softly once like applause. Nadia hated that more than anything else. She didn't want to be an event. They brought her into the largest cabin, laid her on a couch near the fire, wrapped her in blankets that smelled like cedar and old rain. The older woman examined Nadia's ankle and murmured, "It's clean," as if she'd expected something else. "We'll treat it," she promised. "You'll be safe here." For the first few hours, Nadia almost believed it. They splinted her ankle carefully. They gave her tea so bitter it made her mouth pucker. They spoke about the forest with reverence, using phrases like balance and the old rules. Nadia kept trying to steer the conversation toward leaving, toward calling a ranger, toward getting a proper evac. Every time she brought it up, Mara would touch her shoulder gently and say, "Rest. Tomorrow." The others echoed it. Tomorrow. It began to feel less like reassurance and more like a chant. When night came, they invited her to dinner. Nadia told herself food meant safety. Communities don't feed you if they plan to hurt you, her rational mind insisted. But rational minds don't belong in horror. The stew was rich and thick and smelled like pepper and something sweet underneath like caramelized onions. Nadia took one bite and felt her stomach dip. The texture was wrong. Too tender, almost silky, the way meat feels when it's been cooked too long. She told herself it was venison. She told herself it was rabbit. She told herself she was being dramatic. She swallowed anyway because hunger and fear make you compromise with your instincts. The man at the head of the table, who introduced himself as Silas, watched her chew as if it mattered. "Good?" he asked. Nadia forced a smile. "Yeah," she said. "It's good." Silas's expression softened, almost affectionate. "You'll get stronger," he said. "We need you strong enough to understand." That was when Nadia noticed the missing person flyers. They were pinned neatly on a board near the cabin door like decoration. A dozen of them, maybe more. Different years, different faces. The printed words blurred for a second as Nadia's eyes adjusted, but the photos didn't blur. She recognized one face immediately. A young man with curly hair she'd seen earlier chopping wood outside, laughing with someone by the garden. Nadia's heart thudded once, heavy. She looked again. Another flyer showed a woman with straight, black hair. Nadia had watched that same woman stir the stew. Nadia's hands went cold despite the fire. She stared down at her bowl and felt the meat sit in her stomach like a stone. She waited until someone asked her a question, something harmless like where she was from, and used the moment to scan the room. The children were still staring, unblinking. Their skin looked pale, almost gray in the firelight. Not sickly, just drained, like they hadn't seen sun in years. Nadia realized none of them had spoken once, not a word, not a giggle, nothing. When Nadia met one child's eyes, the child's lips moved slightly, shaping a sound with no voice. Nadia couldn't hear it, but she could read it. "Run." Nadia pushed her bowl away. "I need to use the bathroom," she lied, because lies are sometimes the only weapon you have. Mara stood up immediately. "I'll help you," she said. Nadia forced a laugh. "I can manage." Mara's smile sharpened at the edges. "You can't walk," Nadia gestured to the splint. "I can hop." For a second the room held still, as if everyone was waiting to see what Mara would do. Then Mara nodded. "Of course," she said, "and hop." She led Nadia down a hallway lit by oil lamps. The walls were lined with carvings, those same spirals and circles scratched into the wood like someone had been keeping score. At the end of the hall, Mara opened a door. The bathroom was clean, almost too clean, and smelled strongly of herbs. Mara lingered in the doorway. "I'll wait," she said. Nadia's throat tightened. "Privacy?" she asked. Mara tilted her head. "We don't hide from each other here," she replied, voice soft. "That's the sickness of the old world." Nadia swallowed. "Please," she said. Mara stared a beat too long, then stepped away, leaving the door open a crack. Inside, Nadia's hands shook so badly she fumbled the latch on the medicine cabinet. Bandages, alcohol, needles, a jar of honey. And beneath it all, a brown glass bottle labeled in careful handwriting. Fever. Nadia stared at it. Fever meant infection. Infection meant time. Time meant justification. She remembered the way the older woman had murmured, "It's clean," like she'd been disappointed. Nadia's ankle throbbed in a slow, pulsing rhythm, and suddenly the splint felt less like aid and more like a timer. She heard voices outside the door, low, calm, intimate. Nadia pressed her ear closer, heart pounding. Silas spoke first. "It will turn," he said. "It always turns." Another voice, older woman, answered. "It's already warm." Mara's voice, gentle. "She's fighting it. Strong body." Silas sighed like a man discussing weather. "Good. Strong means less waste." Nadia's vision narrowed. Her breath came shallow. But what happened next changed everything. Silas added almost kindly, "We won't take her until the forest has taken her first. That's our rule." Nadia backed, away from the door silently, mind racing. The only thing that kept her from screaming was the fact that screaming wouldn't make her louder than the forest. She looked around for anything useful. Scissors, a small trash bin, a bottle of disinfectant. She grabbed the scissors and held them against her palm until the cold metal steadied her. She opened the window above the sink. Rain-soaked air rushed in. The drop was short, maybe 5 feet, into wet ferns and mud. Nadia's ankle screamed at the thought. She didn't have another thought. She swung one leg over, teeth clenched, and lowered herself out, biting back a sob as pain flared up her shin. She landed wrong, nearly collapsing, but caught herself on the wall, fingers slipping on moss. Her breath came in ragged bursts. She could hear the cabin behind her, warm and safe-looking, like a trap disguised as home. She moved by hopping, dragging, crawling, whatever got her away. The forest was darker here, denser. The rain muffled sound. Nadia tried to orient herself, tried to remember the path they'd carried her along. Everything looked the same. That was the point. She kept going anyway, following the faint slope downward, thinking water meant roads, thinking anything meant something. Her hands were slick with mud, her clothes soaked through, every hop sent lightning through her ankle. She tasted blood where she'd bitten her lip. Behind her, a low sound drifted through the trees, singing. 3 notes, repeating. The lullaby. It wasn't close enough to pinpoint, but it was close enough to prove she wasn't alone. Then a flashlight beam swept across the ferns ahead, sudden and bright. Nadia froze. For a heartbeat, she thought it was a ranger, a miracle, a real rescue. A voice called softly, "Nadia." It was Mara's voice, gentle, concerned. "You'll hurt yourself," Mara said, "and come back. We'll take care of you." Nadia's throat tightened around a sob of pure rage. She didn't answer. She waited until the beam moved away, then slid behind a fallen log, pressing her face into wet bark to keep from making a sound. The singing continued, closer now, and Nadia realized multiple people were moving through the forest, spreading out. Not panicked, not rushed, methodical, like farmers searching a field. Nadia forced herself onward. Her ankle burned. She could feel warmth under the bandage, heat that wasn't from exertion. Her mind flashed to the bottle labeled fever. She wondered if the tea had been drugged, if the herbs were medicine or poison. She wondered how many of the faces on that bulletin board had tried to run with broken bones and how many had made it 10 feet before kindness caught up to them. Her breath began to hitch as chills ran through her despite the exertion. A fever. It was starting. That's why they'd let her eat. That's why they'd waited. The rule wasn't mercy, it was branding. The moment her body began to fail, she would qualify. The road saved her by accident. She didn't find it by skill, she fell onto it. She reached a strip of gravel, then asphalt, and collapsed with her cheek against the wet surface, sobbing with relief so intense it felt like pain. Headlights appeared through rain. A car slowed. A man got out, startled, asking if she was okay. Nadia tried to speak and couldn't at first. Her voice was gone, swallowed by terror and cold. She managed finally, Don't stop there," and pointed shakily back toward the tree line. The man followed her gesture and squinted into the dark. "There's nobody," he said. Nadia shook her head violently, tears mixing with rain. There is, she whispered. They're right there. The man hesitated, then helped her into the car and drove fast. At the hospital, the doctors called it a clean fracture with a developing infection. Nothing that couldn't be treated with antibiotics if caught early. They asked where she'd been. Nadia told them. She told the police too, shaking so hard she couldn't hold her water cup. She described the cabins, the garden, the solar panels, the symbols carved into trees. She described the missing person flyers and the stew. She described Silas. She described Mara's lullaby. The officers listened, took notes, exchanged glances that tried to be neutral and failed. One of them asked, gently, if she'd taken anything. Nadia stared at him and laughed, a short, broken sound. Just tea, she said, just stew. They searched the area the next day. Rangers, deputies, dogs. Nadia insisted on going with them despite the pain because she needed to see the place in daylight and prove to herself she wasn't losing her mind. They drove to the trailhead. They followed her directions. They pushed through ferns and rain and moss. Nadia pointed to where the path should have been. Nothing. She insisted she recognized a particular tree, a split trunk, a patch of mushrooms like a crescent moon. The search team found the tree. They found the mushrooms. But the marks on the bark were gone. No spirals, no circles, no scratches. The place where the commune had been was empty forest floor, uninterrupted and ancient, as if no cabin had ever pressed weight into it. No smoke smell, no cleared earth, no garden beds, no footprints. One ranger knelt and sifted the soil, frowning. No sign of recent structures, he said. Nadia felt her knees weaken. It was right here, she whispered. The ranger's face softened in the same careful way people look at witnesses they can't help. Ma'am, he said, this section hasn't had any permitted buildings in decades. That night, alone in her apartment with rain tapping the window like fingernails, Nadia unwrapped her bandage to check the ankle. The swelling had gone down. The infection looked controlled. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt dread curl in her stomach as she studied the skin around the fracture. Thin, scarring in a faint semicircle like the impression of small teeth. Not on the surface, deeper, as if something had bitten from inside and healed over. Nadia's hands shook as she rewrapped the bandage. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself it was just skin pulling strangely as it healed. She told herself she'd been delirious in the woods. Then her phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. A photo message. It was a missing person flyer, freshly printed, crisp and clean. The face on it was Nadia's, taken from a photo she'd posted online months earlier. Underneath, in bold letters, missing. And below that, in smaller type, a line that turned her blood to ice. Last seen entering Olympic National Forest alone. Nadia's fingers went numb around the phone. A second message arrived immediately after, just text. Don't worry, we only take the ones who are already dying anyway. Unable to include citations because the system requires them, but access to external sources is disabled for this turn.